The first week in our new home was supposed to be peaceful, a chance to finally breathe after years of city chaos. Instead, it turned into a battlefield. My wife Eva, a retired K-9 officer who now relies on a wheelchair, had her specially equipped van clamped and dragged away by an HOA president who thought she could bully us into submission. What Marilyn Cole didn't realize was that Eva still carried the instincts of a cop, the discipline of a fighter, and a Rolodex of allies who weren't afraid to step into the fray. What began as a petty dispute over a wheelchair ramp quickly escalated into a war that exposed corruption, financial kickbacks, and a hidden empire of control. The HOA thought they could isolate us, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. This wasn't just about a van, it was about independence, dignity, and the law. And once the K-9 unit showed up at our door, the entire neighborhood would never be the same again. Before we dive into the full story, let me ask you comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. When we first stepped into Cedarbrook Estates, I believed we had found a quiet refuge where Eva could finally focus on her physical therapy without the constant noise of the city. The neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate brochure: manicured lawns, cul-de-sacs lined with oak trees, and a small lake glinting in the distance. But beneath that postcard beauty, I would soon learn, lurked a fortress of control disguised as an HOA. It started the third evening after we moved in. I was helping Eva transfer from her wheelchair to the couch when the doorbell rang. She adjusted her leg braces and gave me that calm, knowing smile she always did when she sensed my nerves. "Go on," she said, "I'll be fine." At the door stood a woman with silver-streaked hair styled into an immovable helmet. Her clipboard rested against a perfectly pressed blazer, and two men in matching polo shirts flanked her like bodyguards. "Good evening. I'm Marilyn Cole, president of the Cedarbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Welcome to our community," she said, her smile practiced but hollow. Her eyes darted over my shoulder, catching sight of Eva on the couch. I felt an unease crawl up my spine. "Our realtor explained that this property was exempt from HOA jurisdiction," I said, scratching my head. "It was built before the association was even formed. That's in our deed." Marilyn's smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "That must be a mistake. Every property here is part of the HOA. Mandatory membership. No exceptions." I shook my head and tried to close the door politely, but she pressed a thick binder into my hands. "You'll need to review our guidelines before Wednesday's meeting at 7 p.m. sharp. And another thing," she leaned in her tone, "sharpening the ramp by your side door doesn't meet aesthetic standards. You'll need to remove it." I nearly laughed, thinking she was joking, but her expression told me otherwise. "That ramp is for my wife. She's disabled. Removing it isn't an option. Rules are rules," she said flatly. "You can apply for a variance, but our committee only meets quarterly. Next review in August." From behind me, Eva's voice cut in calm but edged with steel. "Who's at the door, Noah?" "Just the HOA," I answered, trying to steady my voice. Marilyn peeked past me, locking eyes with Eva. There was no flicker of sympathy, only calculation. She pressed on. "And your wife's van parked in the driveway, with all those decals, that constitutes a commercial vehicle. Against our bylaws. It must be kept inside a garage overnight." I stiffened. "That van is equipped for her wheelchair. The decal isn't advertising. It's a K-9 support emblem. Eva served 15 years as a police officer." Marilyn's lips curled into a cold smile. "The rules apply to everyone, Mr. Grant. Wednesday, 7 p.m. Don't be late." She withdrew her foot from the door and strutted away, the two men in polos trailing her like shadows. I closed the door with shaking hands and turned back to Eva. She was leafing through the thick folder, her jaw tightening with every page. 56 pages of nonsense," she muttered. "Grass must not exceed 2 inches. Only flags approved on designated holidays." And here she tapped angrily at a section. "All vehicles with decals must be stored in a garage." "Noah, this is ridiculous. It's not even legal," I said, sitting beside her. "The Americans with Disabilities Act guarantees your right to accessibility. They can't touch the ramp. And as for your van, well, we have documentation that our property isn't even under their authority." Eva closed the folder with a sharp thud. "Then we'll fight this." That night, I retrieved our closing documents from the fireproof safe. Every paper confirmed what we already knew: our lot predated the HOA's formation. By law, we weren't under their jurisdiction. Still, Eva insisted we prepare for war. She took out her phone and began recording a video log. "If they escalate," she said, "we'll have evidence. Always start with evidence." The following morning, I left early for work, thinking the worst was behind us. Eva had therapy at 10, and she promised she'd call me when she got back. But around noon, my phone rang. Her voice was tight with fury. Noah, they put a boot on my van. What I shouted into the phone. Marilyn and some tow company. I can't move it. I missed my appointment. Get here now. I left the office without a word to my boss and sped home. As I pulled into the street, I saw the scene unfold, Eva in her wheelchair blocking a tow truck driver from attaching chains while Marilyn stood smugly across the street with arms crossed. This is illegal, Eva was saying, her tone firm but quiet. You cannot tow a mobility vehicle from private property without authorization. The driver shrugged, waving a paper. I have authorization, signed by the HOA president. Violation of community standards. This property isn't part of your HOA, I shouted as I jumped from my car. Not my problem, the driver replied. I just follow orders. Marilyn sauntered closer, smirking. Perhaps this will motivate you to attend Wednesday's meeting. Consider it a warning. Eva's eyes hardened. Few people knew the quiet woman in the wheelchair had once tackled armed suspects and trained some of the fiercest dogs in law enforcement. She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. Her wallpaper was a faded police badge with the K-9 emblem. Remove that boot now, she said, voice low but deadly serious. Or I make one call to my former captain and you'll have 5 patrol cars here investigating attempted theft. The driver faltered eyes, flicking nervously between Eva and Marilyn. She's bluffing, Marilyn sneered. Eva raised her eyebrows. Try me. 15 minutes later, a patrol officer arrived. Not just any officer, Eva's former rookie partner, now a beat cop in our district. His presence was enough to make the tow driver unlock the boot and back away. Marilyn's smugness evaporated as she retreated to her porch, muttering about troublemakers. But I knew then that this wasn't over. That night, I installed cameras around the property. Eva contacted an old friend, an attorney specializing in housing discrimination. This isn't about a ramp or a van, she said as we prepared the evidence. It's about control. And Marilyn Cole doesn't know who she just picked a fight with. The morning after the boot incident, I thought things might calm down. Surely, I told myself, the embarrassment of having her scheme undone by a single phone call would force Marilyn to retreat. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like her, it's that power isn't surrendered, it's clawed for, even when the law is against them. Ava was finishing her coffee when she glanced out the front window. You might want to see this, she said, her tone flat. I joined her and my stomach dropped. Marilyn was marching down the street with 2 clipboard-carrying associates stopping at each house, pointing at our property and scribbling notes. It looked less like a neighborly walk and more like a military inspection. They're rallying the troops, Eva muttered. I frowned. Over what, a ramp and a decal? She shook her head. This isn't about aesthetics. It's about control. People like Marilyn don't stop. They escalate. Her prediction proved true that very afternoon. When I returned from work, Eva's jaw was set, her hands clenched on the wheels of her chair. You won't believe this, she said, holding up a neon yellow slip. What is it? An anonymous complaint filed with the city against us. They're claiming our irrigation system violates water restrictions. The inspector's scheduled for tomorrow. I felt my pulse spike. Are you kidding me? She shook her head. Not only that, someone blocked our driveway this morning with a parked SUV. Gerald from next door helped me move it, but it wasn't an accident. They want to wear us down inch by inch. That night, we sat in the glow of our living room lamp, the thick HOA rulebook spread across the table. Eva scrolled through her laptop, cross-referencing laws with alarming precision. Look here, she said, pointing at the screen. This state passed an amendment 5 years ago. HOA rules cannot override ADA compliance. They can't force me to remove that ramp. And here she opened another tab, our deed. See the stamp, this lot predates the HOA by 10 years. We're grandfathered. By law, we don't owe them a dime. I leaned back, exhaling. So what's their play? Eva's eyes narrowed. Kickbacks. Did you notice how fast that tow truck showed up yesterday? No one gets service that quick unless there's an arrangement. The thought chilled me. She was right. That driver hadn't just been in the neighborhood by coincidence. He was waiting ready like someone had called in advance. Later that evening, as we installed another camera above the garage, Gerald Pike ambled over. He was in his late 60s, wiry, with a slow gait that still carried dignity. Heard what happened, he said quietly. Marilyn's been pulling this kind of stunt for years. Most folks just pay up or move out. Why hasn't anyone fought back? I asked. He gave a sad chuckle. Fear. You don't know what she did to the Gonzalez family last year. Their son ran a food truck. She fined them daily until they packed up and left. Claimed the truck was a commercial operation lowering property values. Truth is, Marilyn doesn't care about property values. She cares about control. Eva leaned forward in her chair. Gerald, you've been here the longest, right? Do you remember where the old property line markers were? He nodded. As a matter of fact, I do. His eyes twinkled, and he pointed to the corner of our yard. See that oak tree? Before the HOA, that was the boundary. This house was never supposed to be part of Cedar Brook Estates. I've got old plats in my attic. If you need proof, I'll dig them up. Eva smiled. That would be invaluable. The next morning, things escalated further. I received a frantic call from Eva while at work. They towed it Noah. This time they took the whole van. What? My chair screeched as I shot up from my desk. I was at therapy, came out, and it was gone. They left a sticker on the pavement. I called the number. They say it's at Rapid Lot, and they won't release it unless we pay $450. Marilyn signed the authorization. By the time I reached the impound yard, my blood was boiling. The place looked like a prison camp chain-link fence, topped with barbed wire, rusting floodlights, and rows of vehicles crammed behind locked gates. Eva sat outside the office in her wheelchair, arms crossed, fury radiating off her. I've been here for 2 hours, she said as I rushed to her. They won't release it without payment. This is illegal, I barked as we entered the office. A board attendant barely looked up. Release fee is $450, cash or card, extra $50 every 24 hours. This vehicle is ADA compliant, specially equipped for mobility, I shot back. Towing it is a violation of federal law. The man shrugged. Take it up with the HOA. I just processed the paperwork. Eva handed me the authorization form. At the bottom, in Marilyn's neat cursive, were the words, Commercial Vehicle Violation, K-9 Decal Advertising. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Advertising, I spat. That's a badge of service, not a business logo. But there was no reasoning with a system designed to profit. We paid the fee, seething, and inspected the van. Scratches marred the wheelchair ramp. Eva's silence as she traced them with her fingers was more terrifying than any outburst. Photograph everything, she said, finally. Her voice was cold, surgical, every scratch, every paper, every timestamp. We're building a case. On the drive home, Eva was relentless. She called our attorney, her old captain, even a reporter she'd worked with years ago. Melissa, she said into the phone, remember that piece you wanted to do about discrimination against first responders? Well, I've got your story. By the time we pulled into the driveway, she had arranged for a news crew to attend Wednesday's HOA meeting. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was setting the stage for a public battle. As I carried our stack of paperwork inside, I noticed something new. Small American flags lined the edge of our property. Gerald waved from across the street. Mark the original boundary for you, he called. That land was never theirs to claim. Been waiting years for someone to stand up to her. Eva's eyes softened for the first time that day. Thank you, Gerald, she said. You have no idea how much this means. That evening, she laid out her uniform, the navy blue jacket she'd worn for commendation ceremonies, still bearing the medals and the K-9 patch from her years of service. She placed her old badge photo in the pouch on her wheelchair. I frowned. You're really going to wear that? She gave me a sly smile. Marilyn wants to shame us. Fine. I'll remind everyone exactly who they're dealing with. The battle lines were drawn, and as the sun set over Cedar Brook Estates, I realized this was no longer a private dispute over a ramp or a decal. It was the beginning of a war that would expose corruption far deeper than anyone in this neighborhood could imagine. The night before the HOA meeting, our house felt less like a home and more like a command post. Papers were spread across the dining room table, property deeds, ADA guidelines, photographs of the damaged van, even screenshots of city ordinances Eva had pulled from government websites. The hum of our newly installed security cameras echoed faintly through the walls, each tiny green light, a silent witness to the siege we were under. Eva sat in her wheelchair, flipping through a binder with the precision of a trial lawyer preparing an opening statement. We're not just fighting for ourselves, she said without looking up. Marilyn has been running this place like her own fiefdom for years. Every bogus fine, every towing fee, it's a racket. And now we have proof. I rubbed my temples. But will proof matter? These HOAs, they count on people being too tired or too scared to push back. Her eyes lifted to mine, sharp and unyielding. That's why we have to push harder. I didn't spend 15 years chasing drug traffickers and training K-9 units just to let a clipboard queen intimidate me. The next morning, the storm escalated. I opened the mailbox to find 3 letters all stamped with the HOA's seal. One cited us for unsightly ramp obstruction. Another claimed our lawn exceeded the maximum height allowance. The third was the most outrageous, a demand for $1 200 inches back dues for services we had never agreed to and legally weren't required to pay. I brought them inside, tossing them onto the table. They're tripling down. Eva scanned them, her jaw tightening. Perfect. More evidence of harassment. Let them dig their own grave. By noon, Marilyn was out again, clipboard in hand, leading a group of neighbors on what she smugly called a property value walk. They paused conspicuously in front of our house, whispering, pointing, shaking their heads like we were the cancer of Cedar Brook Estates. One man even snapped photos of our ramp as if a piece of aluminum was lowering their resale prices. They're trying to isolate us, I said bitterly, watching from the window. No, Eva corrected, her voice steady. They're trying to control the narrative. But narratives can be rewritten. She wasn't wrong. By mid-afternoon, Eva had mobilized her network. She called Frank Gonzalez, the man who'd been forced out by Marilyn's crusade against his food truck. He confirmed what Gerald had hinted. Marilyn's son managed a landscaping company that mysteriously received contracts funded by HOA dues. Another neighbor, Mrs. Patel, admitted she'd been fined for planting roses without committee approval. Each story painted the same picture: selective enforcement, intimidation, and financial impropriety. Eva documented everything, her phone buzzing with replies. "See this?" she said, showing me an email thread. TriStar Recovery, the towing company, is registered at the same mailing address as Cole Property Services. Marilyn's empire isn't just HOA fees, it's towing contracts, landscaping, maybe more. It's organized exploitation. The air felt heavier with every revelation. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. It was corruption dressed up as community governance. That evening, Gerald came by with a dusty folder. "Found those plats I mentioned," he said, laying them carefully on the table. The yellowed papers bore county seals and surveyor signatures dating back to 1979. Clear as daylight, our lot was outside the boundaries of Cedar Brook Estates. Eva beamed. "This is gold. Thank you, Gerald." He shrugged, his voice low. "Been holding on to it for years, hoping someone would have the guts to fight her. You're the first ones I've seen who do." The three of us sat for hours, piecing together a timeline of Marilyn's overreach. Fines escalated after she became president. Complaints disappeared when neighbors suddenly moved out. Budgets ballooned with vague maintenance fees. The picture forming was undeniable. Marilyn wasn't running an HOA, she was running a racket. Later, after Gerald left, Eva looked at me with that mischievous glint I had come to both love and fear. "Tomorrow night when we walk into that meeting, I'm wearing my uniform." I hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Her smile was razor sharp. "Marilyn wants to portray me as weak as a burden. Let's remind her who she's really dealing with, a decorated K-9 officer who still has friends in law enforcement." The next day dragged like an eternity. At work, I couldn't concentrate, my mind consumed by images of Eva rolling into that meeting like a general on the front line. When I returned home, she was already dressed. The navy blue uniform jacket fit snugly over her shoulders, her medals gleaming under the lamplight. She pinned the photo of herself and her old K-9 partner Rex to the side of her wheelchair. "You look—" I swallowed hard. "You look unstoppable," she smiled. "That's the point." As dusk settled, we rehearsed. I laid out the deed, the ADA guidelines, Gerald's plats, and the photos of the scratched ramp. Eva reviewed her talking points like she was preparing to testify in court. Then, just as we were about to leave, her phone buzzed. It was Melissa, the reporter. "Camera crew's ready. We'll be there before the meeting starts." Eva's eyes sparkled. Perfect timing. If Marilyn wants a show, we'll give her one. When we finally wheeled out of the driveway, Gerald waved from his porch. "Give 'em hell," he called. The clubhouse where the HOA met loomed ahead, its facade, spotless, its flag perfectly centered on the pole. Yet, as I pushed open the side door to the only wheelchair-accessible ramp tucked inconveniently around the back, Eva snapped a photo. "Violation number 1, she murmured. "Front entrances must be ADA accessible." Inside, rows of folding chairs were filled with neatly dressed neighbors, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. At the head table sat Marilyn, gavel in hand, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Eva rolling confidently down the aisle in full uniform. Whispers rippled through the room. "Is she a cop? Wasn't she retired? Why's the news crew here?" For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw fear flicker across Marilyn's face. Not much, but enough. Eva positioned herself squarely in the center aisle, shoulders back, chin lifted. I laid our stack of evidence on the table with deliberate care. "We're here," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the room, "and we're not leaving until this community hears the truth." In that moment, the tide began to turn. The HOA had wanted a quiet surrender. What they got instead was a battle cry that would echo far beyond Cedarbrook Estates. The night of the meeting, tension hung in the air like a thunderstorm waiting to break. As Eva and I approached the clubhouse, the buzz of voices spilled into the parking lot. Neighbors stood in small clusters, some curious, some hostile, others clearly conflicted. But when the news van pulled in behind us, its satellite dish rising toward the dark sky, every conversation froze. Eva rolled beside me in her uniform medals glinting in the floodlights. She looked less like a neighbor attending a community meeting and more like a commanding officer arriving at a tribunal. Marilyn was already posted at the clubhouse entrance, flanked by her usual lieutenants in matching polos. Her smile tightened when she saw the cameras. "This is a private meeting," she snapped, blocking the doorway. "Actually," Melissa the reporter chimed in, hoisting her press badge under state open meeting laws. "HOA meetings that deal with governance and finances are subject to public access. Unless, of course, you'd like us to mention your attempt to restrict media." The color drained slightly from Marilyn's face. She stepped aside with a brittle laugh. "Fine, but we won't tolerate disruptions." Inside, rows of metal chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors shifted uneasily. A long folding table stretched across the front, where Marilyn and 4 board members sat, papers and binders neatly stacked. A sign-in sheet circulated. Eva signed with calm deliberation, then photographed the page for records. When Marilyn banged her gavel, the room quieted. "This meeting is now in session. Homeowners not in compliance will each be given 2 minutes to present their case. Board decisions are final." Eva rolled forward before she was called. The sight of her uniform silenced the murmurs. "My name is Eva Grant. This association illegally targeted my mobility van, damaged my wheelchair ramp, and attempted to fine me for living in a home that she placed a document on the table is not and has never been under your jurisdiction." Marilyn's fingers whitened around her gavel. "That's not on tonight's agenda," she said sharply. "Then add it," Eva countered, her voice firm. "Or you'll find yourself explaining to a judge why you refused evidence of ADA violations and property exemptions." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Marilyn tried to recover. "We have no record of such exemptions." That was my cue. I stepped forward and spread the evidence across the table. The original 1979 deed the plat survey Gerald had provided the county GIS printout. Each bore official stamps and signatures. "These documents prove this property predates Cedarbrook Estates. We are not members. Your authority does not apply." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then a voice from the audience broke it. "They towed my son's car last year," a woman said, standing with trembling hands. "Claimed his university parking sticker counted as signage. Cost me $400 to get it back." Another man rose. "They fined me for a basketball hoop. Said it was 6 inches too tall." 6 inches. The room erupted into overlapping complaints, stories of arbitrary fines, harassment, threats of foreclosure. Marilyn banged the gavel furiously. "Order, order." But the tide had shifted. Even one of her own board members, Mrs. Patel, stood slowly clutching a folder. "I've been reviewing the financial records as treasurer. There are irregularities. Payments to a landscaping company, Cole Property Services, totaling nearly 30% of all collected dues." She looked directly at Marilyn. "That company is registered to your son's address." Gasps swept the room. Marilyn's face went pale. "That is completely inappropriate. Those payments were authorized maintenance expenses." Eva leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "No, Mrs. Cole. They're kickbacks. And combined with the towing contracts tied to TriStar Recovery, it paints a clear picture of corruption." Melissa's cameraman zoomed in, capturing every flicker of panic across Marilyn's face. At that moment, the back doors opened. Captain Diaz entered in full uniform, flanked by 2 officers. He carried a slim folder under his arm. "Good evening," he said smoothly. "We've received multiple complaints regarding selective enforcement and possible financial misconduct within this HOA. I'd like to review the records with your board tonight." Marilyn stammered. This is harassment. We are a private association, funded by mandatory dues from residents," Diaz replied calmly. "That makes your financial dealings subject to state oversight. You can cooperate here or at the station." The room exploded in murmurs. Marilyn tried to rally. "Neighbors, don't be fooled. These outsiders are trying to destroy the community we've built." But her words were drowned out by the voices of those she'd wronged. One by one, residents stood recounting their fines, their towed cars, their sleepless nights, fearing retaliation. The weight of testimony crushed Marilyn's protests. Finally, Mrs. Patel turned to the board. I motion that we suspend Marilyn Cole as president pending investigation, refund all towing fees, and authorize a full independent audit. A shaky voice seconded. Then another. The vote was swift and nearly unanimous. Marilyn slammed the gavel down, but it no longer carried authority. Eva exhaled, her eyes blazing with determination. This is only the beginning. The ADA violations alone could carry federal penalties. And we will not stop until accountability is served. Marilyn's composure shattered. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice trembling. But as Captain Diaz stepped forward to collect the financial ledgers, I knew the balance of power had shifted for good. The empire Marilyn had built on fear and intimidation was crumbling under the weight of truth. Outside neighbors clustered around us. Some apologized for staying silent so long. Others shared relief that someone had finally stood up. Gerald clasped Eva's hand. You've done more tonight than anyone's managed in years. Eva gave him a weary but genuine smile. It's not over yet. Corruption doesn't end with one vote. We need to rebuild this community into something fair. As the news crew packed up and the police escorted Marilyn out, the night air felt lighter, as if the neighborhood itself was breathing for the first time. Still, I knew battles remained ahead. People like Marilyn rarely go quietly. And as Eva wheeled toward our car metals glinting under the streetlights, I realized the war for Cedarbrook Estates had only just begun. The days that followed the explosive HOA meeting were anything but calm. Though Marilyn had been suspended and her authority stripped in front of her neighbors, the aftermath left a neighborhood raw with uncertainty. Some residents avoided eye contact when they passed our house, afraid of being caught in the middle. Others knocked on our door with baked goods or quiet words of thanks, finally emboldened to speak after years of silent resentment. Eva wasted no time turning the momentum into action. Our dining room remained a war room, only now the stacks of documents had doubled. She organized everything into folders labeled evidence, towing contracts, ADA violations, financial records. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from residents who wanted to share their own HOA horror stories. Each call and email added to the growing case that Marilyn's corruption stretched beyond our block. One evening, as I poured coffee into chipped mugs, Eva gestured toward a stack of printed emails. Look at this. 12 families, 12 report that TriStar Recovery towed their vehicles under suspicious circumstances. Same paperwork, same signatures, same inflated release fees. This wasn't random. It was systematic. I skimmed the pages, shaking my head. How did she get away with it for so long? Eva's eyes hardened. Fear and isolation. People thought they were alone, but now they know they're not. It didn't take long for Marilyn to attempt a counterstrike. 3 days after the meeting, we received a certified letter claiming we still owed retroactive dues because of a clerical error in the property registry. The letter threatened liens, collections, and even foreclosure. It was signed not by Marilyn, but by Martin Cooper, the HOA vice president. Eva read it aloud, then set it on the table with deliberate calm. She's pulling strings from the shadows. Martin's just her puppet. I frowned. So, what do we do? Eva smirked. We cut the strings. She called Mrs. Patel, the treasurer, who had bravely revealed the financial irregularities at the meeting. Within an hour, Patel was sitting at our table, sipping tea nervously as Eva laid out the plan. Martin's covering for her, Eva said. But he's sloppy. We need to examine every transaction over the last 2 years. If we can prove he knew about the kickbacks, he goes down with her. If he didn't know, then he's just weak, and weak can be replaced. Mrs. Patel nodded, her hands trembling as she opened her own folder of photocopied checks and bank statements. There's more, she whispered. Transfers to something called Community Security Fund. But there are no cameras, no patrols. The money vanished. Eva's eyes gleamed. Exactly what we need. The next day, Gerald arrived with another surprise, an old cardboard box filled with neighborhood newsletters dating back 20 years. Figured you'd want the paper trail, he said. Leafing through them, Eva discovered a pattern each time dues increased. Marilyn justified it with vague promises of enhanced security or community beautification. Yet no projects had ever been completed. By then, our case was ironclad. But Eva wanted more than exposure. She wanted reform. It's not enough to remove Marilyn, she told me one night as we sat on the porch, the air heavy with summer humidity. We need to rebuild this HOA into something transparent. If we don't, someone else will rise and repeat the same abuses. Her plan was ambitious. She drafted proposals for bylaw changes, voluntary membership, mandatory audits, open voting, ADA compliance built into every policy. She even suggested a new committee dedicated to accessibility and community relations, which she offered to chair. Are you sure? I asked, watching her type furiously. After everything, do you really want to run for the board? Eva's smile was grim but resolute. I don't want to. I need to. If I don't, who will? When the next HOA meeting arrived, a hastily called emergency session, the atmosphere was electric. The clubhouse was packed with residents far more than usual. The news crew was there again, along with a few curious reporters from neighboring communities. Martin sat at the head table, his collar damp with sweat. Mrs. Patel and another board member flanked him, both looking uneasy. Eva rolled to the center of the room, uniform-pressed metals polished. She placed a thick folder on the table. I move that this board disclose all financial records for independent audit. I further move that we hold emergency elections to replace suspended officers and amend the bylaws to ensure transparency. Martin stammered, "This is highly irregular. It's legal," Eva interrupted, holding up a copy of the state's HOA statutes. "And more importantly, it's necessary. Unless you'd like me to share these financial irregularities with the county prosecutor tonight." The room erupted in whispers. Mrs. Patel cleared her throat. "I second the motion." Hands shot up across the room one after another. The vote was overwhelming. Martin slumped in his chair, defeated. With Marilyn suspended and Martin effectively neutralized, Eva's reforms swept through like wildfire. Voluntary membership passed. Audits were approved. And when nominations opened for the new accessibility committee, half the room shouted Eva's name before she could even raise her hand. Afterward, as we packed our papers into the car, Melissa approached with her cameraman. "Eva, the public is going to want to hear from you. This isn't just a neighborhood story anymore, it's about HOA abuse statewide. Would you be willing to do an interview for the evening news?" Eva hesitated only a second. "Yes. But make it clear this isn't just about us. It's about every family who's ever been bullied by people hiding behind rules." That night, our faces appeared on televisions across the county. Eva's calm, steady voice carried weight as she laid out the story of intimidation, corruption, and resilience. For once, the narrative wasn't controlled by Marilyn's clipboard and whispers, it was ours. But victory came with a cost. Later, as we sat together on the porch in the quiet hours, Eva confessed what I had already guessed. They're not done. Marilyn will fight back. People like her always do. I squeezed her hand. "Then we'll be ready." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the darkened street where porch lights glowed like watchful eyes. "Let her come. This time the neighborhood isn't afraid anymore." And with that, I realized something remarkable had happened. In just a few weeks, we had gone from outsiders to leaders, from targets to trailblazers. Cedar Brook Estates was changing, and Eva was the one leading the charge. The night of the emergency elections felt like a turning point for Cedar Brook Estates. The clubhouse was so crowded that people spilled into the hallway, craning their necks to hear. Folding chairs had been dragged from storage closets, and even then a dozen residents stood in the back. The atmosphere was thick with both anticipation and suspicion. Everyone knew something was about to change, but no one was certain how far it would go. Eva rolled to the front with her notes neatly stacked in her lap. I could see how she steadied her breathing the way she always did before giving testimony in court back in her police days. This wasn't just a neighborhood meeting anymore, it was a trial, and the jury was everyone in the room. Martin, the acting president after Marilyn's suspension, looked like a man standing on a trap door. His tie was crooked, sweat beaded at his temples, and his hands shook slightly as he clutched the gavel. "We'll begin with new business," he stammered. "Motion to elect interim officers." Eva raised her hand before he could continue. "Point of order," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Before any elections, this board must address the documented financial misconduct." A murmur rippled across the room. Martin cleared his throat. We've already agreed to an audit." Eva leaned forward. "An audit isn't enough. Residents deserve accountability now. We have evidence that thousands of dollars in dues were siphoned into companies connected to Marilyn Cole's family. We need transparency before we vote on anything else." Melissa, the reporter, sat in the front row, her cameraman filming every second. That little red light on the lens made Martin visibly shrink. Mrs. Patel stood next. "I support Mrs. Grant. I've reviewed the records myself. Payments marked as security improvements were funneled into a non-existent fund. We owe the community answers." Martin tried to wave it off. "These are complicated matters best left to the professionals." "No," Eva said, firmly locking eyes with him. "This is simple theft dressed up as bureaucracy." The room broke into applause. Neighbors who had never dared raise their voices at past meetings were suddenly emboldened. One man in a baseball cap shouted, "What happened to the $15,000 for new playground equipment? My kids are still playing on rusted swings." Another woman stood, her voice shaking. My husband and I were fined for a shed that was already here when we bought our house. We paid because Maryland threatened foreclosure. Are we getting that money back? The dam had burst. One by one, residents aired grievances long buried under fear. Each story was like a nail hammered into the coffin of Maryland's reign. Finally, Captain Diaz stepped forward from the back, his uniform commanding instant attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "our investigation has already uncovered a pattern of misconduct. The towing company TriStar Recovery is owned by Maryland's brother-in-law. The so-called landscaping company is tied to her son, and preliminary audits suggest over $75 0 dues were diverted for personal expenses. These are not community improvements. They are criminal acts." Gasps filled the room. Martin nearly collapsed into his chair. His lips trembled as he stuttered, I didn't know." Eva's voice was merciless. "Ignorance is not an excuse when you're holding the gavel." The vote was swift. Martin was removed from office, effective immediately. Mrs. Patel was elected interim president with overwhelming support. She turned to Eva with a smile that carried both relief and respect. "And I'd like to nominate Mrs. Grant to chair our newly formed Accessibility and Community Relations Committee." The applause was deafening. Even those who had avoided us at first clapped with genuine enthusiasm. Eva accepted with a nod, her face calm, though I knew her heart was pounding. But Marilyn wasn't gone, not yet. Halfway through the meeting, the back door slammed open. She stormed in, hair, disheveled eyes blazing with fury. "This is my association," she shouted. "None of this is legal. You're all sheep letting outsiders destroy everything we've built." Cameras swiveled. Gasps erupted, but Eva didn't flinch. She rolled forward medals, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Marilyn," she said evenly, "the law doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everyone. And it's finally caught up with you." At that moment, Diaz and his officers stepped in. "Mrs. Cole," he announced, "we have a warrant to seize all remaining HOA records under your control. Please step aside." Her face drained of color. For the first time, Marilyn faltered. She tried to protest, but the room itself turned against her. Neighbors she had intimidated for years now shouted back, "You took our money, you threatened my family, enough is enough." The officers collected boxes of ledgers and files while Marilyn stood frozen, her empire collapsing around her. When she was escorted out, still shrieking about conspiracies, the room exhaled in unison. Afterward, as residents gathered around Eva offering hugs, thanks, and even tears, I realized we were witnessing something rare the moment fear turned into courage. People who had once cowered under Marilyn's shadow were now laughing, talking freely, and planning the future. Outside, the night air felt different, lighter somehow. Gerald clapped me on the back. "She's finished," he said. "Mark my words, this neighborhood just took its first breath in years." Eva gave a small smile but didn't celebrate. "Not finished," she corrected quietly. "Exposed. There's a difference. And until every stolen dollar is accounted for and every wrong made right, the work isn't done." We walked to the car in silence, neighbors still buzzing behind us. Eva wheeled herself up the ramp into the van, her uniform catching the glow of the streetlights. I watched her pride swelling in my chest. She wasn't just my wife or a retired K-9 officer. She was the force that had turned a community's whispered complaints into a movement. And though Marilyn's shrill voice still echoed faintly in my ears, drowned out by the sound of the gavel declaring her suspension, I knew Eva was right. The war for Cedar Brook Estates wasn't over. It had only changed battlefields. The following week, Cedar Brook Estates felt like a town under reconstruction. For the first time since we moved in, I noticed children playing in the cul-de-sac without parents hovering nervously nearby. Neighbors lingered at each other's mailboxes, not to spy, but to talk. The air was lighter, freer, but beneath the surface I knew everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marilyn's shadow hadn't fully lifted. Eva, now officially chair of the Accessibility and Community Relations Committee, dove headfirst into her role. She drafted proposals late into the night, her laptop glowing against her determined face. If we rebuild this HOA, she told me, we need to make it something people can trust, not fear. Her plan was ambitious: mandatory quarterly audits, transparent budgets, open forums for residents to voice concerns, and her crown jewel, a complete overhaul of the community center to meet ADA standards. The front entrance needs a ramp, the bathrooms need widening, and playground equipment should be accessible to all kids, she explained, jotting notes furiously. Meanwhile, Mrs. Patel, the interim president, scheduled a neighborhood-wide vote to finalize Marilyn's removal and to fill the rest of the board seats. Flyers were posted, emails sent, even door-to-door conversations held by volunteers. It was democracy in action, messy but real. But Marilyn wasn't gone. Rumors spread that she was calling old allies, promising legal battles, threatening to sue anyone who spoke against her. One evening, Gerald shuffled across our yard holding a folded paper. "Found this on my porch," he muttered, handing it to me. It was an anonymous flyer accusing Eva of using her disability to manipulate neighbors and exploiting her past in law enforcement for power. Eva read it calmly, then set it down. Classic smear tactic, desperate and predictable. I clenched my fists. She's trying to poison the well. Eva's gaze was steady. Let her. The truth speaks louder when people have already seen the lies for themselves. The night of the emergency elections arrived, with storm clouds overhead. Rain slicked the streets as we made our way to the clubhouse. Yet despite the weather, the parking lot was packed. Families carried umbrellas, seniors wore ponchos, and children splashed through puddles. Everyone wanted to witness history. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The board table had been rearranged. Marilyn's former seat was empty, her nameplate gone. Mrs. Patel opened the meeting with a firm voice. "Tonight we decide the future of Cedarbrook Estates. No more closed doors, no more intimidation. This is your community, and you deserve a say. The first order of business, Marilyn's permanent removal." Eva wheeled forward with a stack of papers. "We've gathered sworn statements from 12 families, bank records from Mrs. Patel, and property plats, showing our home was exempt all along. Combined with the investigation already underway, the case is undeniable. Marilyn Cole abused her office for personal gain." The vote was swift, unanimous. For the first time, Marilyn's name was officially erased from the HOA's leadership. A cheer erupted so loud the walls seemed to shake. Next came the election of new officers. Nominations flew. Neighbors who had once stayed silent, now volunteering for roles they never imagined holding. An older man who'd been fined for leaving a recycling bin out too long was nominated as vice president. A young mother whose daughter used a wheelchair was tapped for secretary. Each story symbolized resilience. Then came Eva's turn. "I nominate Mrs. Eva Grant to continue as chair of Accessibility and Community Relations," Mrs. Patel declared. Dozens of hands shot up in support. The applause felt endless. Eva accepted with quiet dignity. "This isn't about me," she said, her voice carrying over the room. "It's about every neighbor who ever felt powerless. Tonight we take back that power, not through anger, but through accountability. This community belongs to all of us." Tears glistened in the eyes of more than one resident. But just as the final ballots were being collected, the doors banged open. Marilyn stormed in, soaked from the rain, flanked by 2 men in suits. "This meeting is illegitimate," she shouted. "I have lawyers, and I will sue every one of you for defamation." Gasps filled the room. The men behind her looked uncomfortable, but followed her lead. "These are my attorneys," Marilyn announced. "Everything you've done tonight will be overturned in court." Eva didn't flinch. She rolled to the center uniform jacket draped over her shoulders, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Marilyn, you can bring an army of lawyers, but you can't erase the evidence. You can't silence the people you've wronged. And you can't hide from the truth." At that moment, Captain Diaz entered with a county prosecutor at his side. The timing was cinematic, almost unreal. The prosecutor stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope. "Mrs. Cole, you are under active investigation for financial fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. We recommend you cooperate fully." The room exploded in murmurs. Marilyn's face went ashen. Her lawyers whispered urgently, but she shook them off, screaming, "This is a witch hunt. You'll all regret this." But no one believed her anymore. The spell had broken. The prosecutor turned to Mrs. Patel. "In the meantime, the community has full authority to proceed with elections. Our office will continue reviewing financial records." With Marilyn dragged from the room in a storm of protests, the ballots were counted. The new board was officially sworn in. For the first time, Cedarbrook Estates had leadership chosen freely, not ruled by fear. When the meeting adjourned, neighbors surrounded Eva, thanking her, hugging her, some even crying with relief. A man I barely knew clasped my shoulder and said, "Your wife changed everything." As we drove home through the rain, Eva looked out the window silent. Finally she spoke. "It's not over. They'll dig deeper. We'll uncover more. But tonight we proved something." "What's that?" I asked. She turned to me, her eyes fierce. "That even the strongest empire built on fear can collapse when ordinary people decide to stand together." I squeezed her hand. And for the first time since we moved in, Cedarbrook Estates truly felt like a community, not a battlefield. For a few weeks, life in Cedarbrook Estates seemed almost normal. Children rode bikes without fear of being scolded. Neighbors waved instead of glared. The freshly elected board met openly on porches and in kitchens not behind closed doors. Eva kept busy chairing her new committee, outlining accessibility improvements and organizing surveys to find out what residents actually wanted for their community. For the first time since moving in, it felt like we might finally belong here. But shadows lingered. Marilyn might have been removed from office, yet her presence was everywhere in the missing funds, in the smears she'd spread, in the bruises of distrust left behind. And then came the call that reminded us her story was far from finished. It was early morning. Eva was sipping her coffee when her phone buzzed. She answered casually, but as she listened, her posture stiffened. "Yes, I understand. We'll cooperate fully," she said before hanging up. I leaned forward. What was that? Her eyes were cold. The county prosecutor. They executed a search warrant on Marilyn's vacation property last night, and they found duplicate financial ledgers. 2 sets of books, one for the board to see, and another hidden showing the real transactions. Kickbacks, shell companies, personal purchases. She was siphoning off nearly $200,000. I whistled low. 200,000? From this neighborhood, Eva nodded grimly. From this neighborhood, and maybe others. She's been at this for years. Moving from one community to another, tightening her grip, then selling her house at a profit once she's milked enough. Later that day, Diaz confirmed it. Marilyn wasn't just a bad neighbor, she was a serial operator. Several nearby HOAs had reported similar irregularities once the news broke. What we thought was a local battle had exposed a county-wide scheme. The weight of it settled on Eva like a mantle she hadn't asked for. Reporters flooded our porch. Neighbors begged her for advice. Other HOA victims from across the state tracked down her number. Our quiet house transformed into a command center again, phones buzzing, papers, scattered people arriving with stories and evidence. I watched Eva balance it all with the same composure she once carried on the police force. "We'll help," she told a man whose car had been wrongfully towed in another neighborhood. "But you need to document everything. Paper trails win battles." To a young mother in tears over fines that had nearly bankrupted her, she said, "You're not alone anymore. We'll make sure of that." At night, when the cameras left and the calls stopped, she'd let her guard down just a little. "Noah," she confessed one evening as we sat on the porch, "I never wanted to lead another fight. I thought retirement meant peace. But maybe this is what I was meant for." I squeezed her hand. "You don't pick the battles, Eva. Sometimes they pick you." The next community meeting was unlike any before. Instead of whispers and fear, there was energy, hope. The new board unveiled a plan to use recovered funds, nearly $75,000 already reclaimed, to build accessible playground equipment and renovate the clubhouse with proper ramps and restrooms. The room erupted in cheers when Eva announced the proposal. Even the most skeptical neighbors stood and applauded. But then came the twist none of us expected. As the meeting wound down, Diaz arrived with an update. Marilyn had confessed partially. To secure a lighter sentence, she admitted to skimming funds but denied personal enrichment, claiming she used the money for unofficial community improvements. But the search warrant had told a different story: luxury furniture designer, handbags, receipts for vacations. The most damning evidence was a safe, tucked in her garage, containing HOA checks, deposited directly into her personal account. The room buzzed with outrage. One resident shouted, "She stole from us for years." Another demanded, "What about the family she forced out? They deserve justice too." Eva raised her hand, silencing the noise. "Justice will come. Marilyn's days of bullying and stealing are over. But tonight, we focus on what comes next. We have a chance to rebuild not just our HOA, but trust itself. Let's prove that a neighborhood can govern itself with fairness, transparency, and compassion." The applause that followed shook the walls. For the first time, Cedar Brook Estates wasn't just surviving, it was healing. In the weeks that followed, tangible changes appeared. Crews installed accessible swings and ramps at the playground. Volunteers repainted fences and planted flowers not because of fines, but because they wanted to. Neighbors who had avoided each other for years now shared cookouts and traded tools. And every time Eva rolled through the neighborhood, people greeted her not with pity, but with gratitude and respect. 6 months later, Marilyn stood in court and pled guilty to fraud and embezzlement. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, plus restitution. Watching the news clip of her being led away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, only closure. The empire she built on fear had finally crumbled. That evening, we hosted a neighborhood barbecue in our backyard. Children ran laughing between picnic tables. Gerald told old stories about when the development first began. Mrs. Patel poured iced tea, while volunteers grilled burgers. Eva sat at the center of it all, her laughter brighter than I had heard in years. As the sun dipped low, she looked at me and said softly, "You know what the real victory is. It's not about exposing Marilyn. It's about proving that a community can stand together. That's something she could never steal." I raised my glass to hers, to saying no to bullies and yes to real community. Around us, the neighborhood cheered not out of fear but out of joy. For the first time since we arrived, Cedarbrook Estates wasn't just a battleground, it was home. What this story taught me, and what I hope it reminds you, is that real strength isn't about intimidation or power on paper. It's about resilience, unity, and the courage to stand up when something is wrong. Eva could have chosen silence. She could have paid the fines, removed the ramp, and let Marilyn's lies continue. But instead, she turned her struggle into a fight for everyone's dignity. And that's the heart of the lesson: one voice backed by truth and determination can ignite change far bigger than itself. Communities thrive when people refuse to be divided, when they hold leaders accountable, and when they choose fairness over fear. So, if you've ever felt powerless in the face of injustice, remember this story. Speak up, document everything, find allies. And most importantly, don't give in to intimidation. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. Share where you're watching from and tell us if you've ever faced a battle with an HOA or community bully. And if you want to join us for more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Together we can build communities that truly care.